of course, officially live now with author Danial Braum. Daniel, thank you so much for being here again, my friend.
It's great to be back. Great to see you, Rick. Thanks for having me back.
100%. I had so much fun last time. I had to have you back, so I really appreciate it. Plus, you keep writing books, so thank you for that as well. And I want to
Yeah.
say too, first of all, for everybody watching this too, you guys, I don't really say this too often. So your newest book, so I've got the Night Marchers over here, and but I did just have, of course, the digital copy of the Serpent Shadow, which I'm going to put a cover for it over here, so everybody can see the cover for that one. And that book actually reminded me about something that Stephen King once said. I'm probably not going to quote him exactly, but something along the lines of, why would you want to ruin a perfectly good story with a plot? The thing about the Serpent Shadow that I really loved is the fact that it was so engaging and enticing, and just all the words are so beautifully written that I found that the actual plot of the book almost seemed like a bit of a bonus rather than, you could have, I always thought that you could easily come up with some sort of a side gig where I would just send you something as boring as like my shopping list, and you could rewrite it, send it back to me, and it would be an engaging thing to read.
Wow. I think somewhere between the United States and Canada, someone was engaged with that plot so well that we Cemetery Dance. I made sure to get a paper arc your way. So I'm due any day now to get my contributor copies, and so we're just gonna have to make sure that we do a take two on that and get you your copy of the Serpent Shadow in paper. But thank you so much for reading it digitally, and for those kind words. Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome. No, it was very beautiful. It was incredible, and it definitely really was a reflection of your style and that your very unique approach that you take to your quiet horror, as you call it. Because I found that very much like what we were chatting about before, that was evident with the Night Marchers, is that you really write from the perspective of setting first. So you've got to have the setting, and then everything else kind of blossoms out from that. And I very much felt that this was very much the same way too, where you had Cancun and you had the setting. And can you maybe tell us a little bit about that, about how you nailed that down so well that I swear that I felt sand between my toes in this ocean air, and of course the pending, doom that was over everything here as we got closer and closer to the end.
Yeah, I think there's a two-part answer to that. I mean, there's a part that I'm conscious of, and the part that I'm not conscious of. I think the subconscious part of that is setting. Setting is often my inspiration, and just from a writer point, that used to be, or at least at the time when I was writing the novella, it's I don't want to say anything's easy, but it's the part I enjoy most. So yeah, so maybe that's the easier part, or it's the part I'm most
Okay.
engaged in. And yeah, Rick and I had a great conversation about setting when we talked about the Night Marchers. It's also the place where my inspiration comes from. So the part that I can't control. So my earliest inspirations for the Serpent Shadow was being a boy down in Mexico and learning about something Mayan called the Sac Bay, the White Road. So I just had these early images of people walking, and that has something to do with just ancient Mayan cities, and it does come into the plot. And I'm glad that the visceralness, or the sensation, the senses of it, did come across in the book, and in Rick's read of it.
Yeah, 100%. So, and that's interesting that you mentioned that you spent some time down there when you were a youngster as well, because it was very clear that not only did we get the super engaging story where some pretty apocalyptic, aspects slowly unfold, as they're very slowly nuanced throughout the story, that something's not quite what it seems. Uh, and then as you go along, of course, you also infuse a lot of Mayan culture into it, a lot of Mayan based history as well. Was that something that you just knew from being there as a boy? Is it something that you maybe spent a little bit of extra research on this, maybe even above and beyond some of your shorter stories?
A little bit of both. Something that interests me more intellectually now as an adult, but also just kind of found its way into my mindset as a teen, was the aspect of there being more to just the vacation land. My first family vacation, we grew up and didn't really have much, didn't really have many vacations like the character in the story. So when I was a youngster, I did one of the first things, first travel experiences was going to the Yucatan Peninsula as a teen or a
Okay.
teenager. And much like Hawaii, this is like a, on the one hand, it's a, this kind of tropical paradise vacation wonderland, but much like Hawaii, kind of like as we see on the television show The Black Lotus, there's so much history, so much of people struggling, and so much of a land in conflict. And just from talking a little bit, just from peel, peeking beneath the surface, learn of that during during my visits there, and cued me in to know that that was going on, and thus be inspired by it and want to include it, embody that in fiction, but very much from an outsider's point of view. The main character is an American, and he's coming into a conflict he doesn't really know exists, or doesn't understand. And I think that's what you're referring to there, the conflict between
100%.
the indigenous Maya people in the Yucatan Peninsula and the Mexican people who both live on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, no, I appreciate that that very much. I thought it was a really fascinating aspect of the storytelling as well, is that you really had, uh, rather than, of course, we've seen all the different types of conflict, man versus man versus himself, but in here it was almost nature versus progress, and it was a really divided
Yeah.
line, and you kind of forced it through the different perspectives and some of the different, certainly the character arc of your main characters in here, that was also a struggle that he had. And it was, there's some of those characters are constantly going back and forth because they would see the pros and the cons to that as well. I can only imagine. I mean, that must have been so much fun for you to explore, and maybe even explore sort of where you stand in all of that as well, I would think.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that. You said it really well. Nature versus progress is definitely one of the themes that is present in the Serpent Shadow, because it is. And I think we should mention the book. The book is set in the mid 1980s, 1986, I believe, in Cancun, in the Yucatan, outside of Cancun, in the Yucatan of Mexico. For those of you who don't know, the Yucatan was largely unsettled, largely by Western standards wild, until the 1970s, when, strangely enough, Rick, you mentioned AI. One of the first AI applications was to these international consortiums used artificial intelligence and weather modeling they had at the time to
Wow, no
pick their
kidding.
next tropical paradise, and that was how Cancun was born. Cancun in Mayan, Cancun means serpent's nest. It was just this
Oh
serpent's
wow.
nest, this beautiful wild place, but it had these conditions that these international consortiums decided to develop it. So when I was there as a child in the early 1980s, some of the places that are mentioned in the Serpent Shadow were just wild places, like of horseback riding, and literally nothing there but Mayan ruin. I returned the next year, and year after, I smelled the smoke. I saw the bulldozers. I saw what are now cities stretching from Cancun almost all the way 100 kilometers south to the country of Belize. They are such fancy, amazing places that I can't even afford to look at. But at the time, they were, they were nothing but wild, and that raises some interesting perspectives and conflicts. Some of them which might be counterintuitive. So as a boy, of course, the emotional thrust of that was, these are the most beautiful beautiful places I've ever seen in the world, and they're being destroyed before my eyes. But the flip side of that, and something as I matured and came back as an older person and as a man, was the flip side of that was a lot of the awful poverty that I saw uh,
Yeah.
was ameliorated some, and in some cases ameliorated by this. So yeah, there's a lot of different no matter how we might feel about one given thing, there are a lot of different sides to progress, and that is one of the things going on in the story. Like, we're entered into Cancun at this time of a crossroads, at this time of a change, where everyone in the story wants something different. The characters want something different.
And of course, you've got the parents that are completely, oblivious to everything. They're just there to have a good time and get a good suntan.
Right.
And all these things are going on. I kind of love that.
Don't go in the pool till you finish your lunch. The parents
Exactly.
oblivious to their kids getting into trouble and the end of the world unfolding around them.
I know. Parents, they really they don't understand. One of the things I was really excited to talk to you about too, Daniel, is that I'm going to preface my question with a question. So this is obviously your, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is your first novella length publication.
Yeah, it is. It has a bit of a winding history. I was fortunate enough that it was acquired by Cemetery Dance ebooks before the time of the new and thriving trade paperback edition. So it did come out as an ebook only in 2019. And the interesting thing about it is, and maybe this is only for word count and technical nerds and know-hows like us, but the book is about 150 pages long, which word count, it sits right around 30,000 words. Okay. So I'm a proponent of a rose is a rose, no matter what you call it, but it sits right on the borderland between actually being a novel and a novella. So it actually falls just shy of 30,000 words. So technically, this book is a novella, if it for officialness. It was marketed as a novel at first, but I think then we brought it back to a novella. It feels like a short novel, and it was out and is out as an ebook from Cemetery Dance ebooks. But once Kevin Lucia and team were founding the Cemetery Dance trade paperback division, they picked it up, and now it's out for the first time in good old-fashioned print.
Oh, there it is. Beautiful.
Here's an arc of it that that didn't quite make it up to the Great White North.
I know. I love me some arcs, but we'll next time. So no, that's great, sure. and it's such a quick read too. I mean, I didn't want it to end, but the way that it was wrapped up, I'm definitely not going to give any spoilers here, but the way it was wrapped up, it really resonated so well. I mean, when you think about it, it could only really end one way. Well, I suppose it's not necessarily true, but the way that it did end, it was kind of nice because it forced the book to stay with me. And I mean, I just finished reading it maybe 4 days ago, and I'm still thinking quite a bit about that as well. And I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me and I want you to feel amazing.
Thank you.
I wouldn't.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough that I've been getting some positive feedback about that ending, and that was an ending. That was an ending that we gave some thought to, and worked. The original editor, acquiring editor, was Norman Prentice, who was great. He's a great author. Yeah, maybe he'll come on the show. And but yeah, it was great. It's a great horror ending, and I say that because my instincts. I do trust my instincts as a writer, but I don't trust my instincts to line up to, hey, write a horror thing, write this. I'll know how to write a story and follow my muse, but yeah, I'm not sure. So I had some great feedback from my editor Norman Prentice about that ending, and I feel good about it, and so far it seems like readers are feeling good and feeling engaged with it, and that's a rewarding thing.
Yeah, definitely, and I definitely dug it a lot. And the reason I wanted to double check and confirm that was in fact your first full length novella is this your first? Do you have other novellas that you have written before? Was this your first attempt? Because I know, of course, you're very well known as an incredible short story writer, but I'm wondering if that was your first stab at the actual short novel length.
I'd have to give it a think. My instinct is to say no, because I do have other longer projects that are not published yet. They're just in the different phases of coming to in publication. Sure. But it certainly was the first novella, certainly the first short novel. I think at the time I did have longer novels in progress.
Cool. And what was the big difference that you found having come from certainly a background of doing a lot of a lot of the short stories. It certainly is it's certainly a different approach, a different mindset, different structuring that you have to consider when you're expanding a short, not even so much expand a short story rather, but I should say writing a longer piece as opposed to writing a shorter piece. Did you find it was much of a difference for you, or did you have to approach things any differently than what you were maybe accustomed to?
I probably did, in that I do remember there was a time where I got to spend a lot of time day after day with the story and move forward that way. I'm a big proponent
Okay.
of a story needs to be the size it needs to be, and it was
Yeah.
so I keep all my ideas, on paper in my mind, and this was one that I knew wasn't going to fit in the size or shape of a short story. And at one point, when I had some time, one winter, I took a chance. I took a chance and wrote it. So yeah, maybe it was the difference is in taking it. I took a chance in writing it because now the novella is thriving. It almost seems to be the preferred form, story form. People love them. They're marketable. But at the time I was writing it, at the time I was shopping it, it was almost the unwanted stepchild. It wasn't quite a place for it. So maybe it's like the only difference in knowing that I really was writing it for myself when I wrote it. Like, short stories, you reach a certain point where you're like, okay, eventually I will find the right home for it. But when I was writing the Serpent, I was like, I really, I really
Where
don't
do you
know
go?
what road where I'm stepping out on this. No pun intended.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm so glad that it found a home eventually, and found, I guess, in a sense two homes sort of, or I guess two rooms in the same home. I don't know, but
Two
I'm
rooms in
glad
the
it's
same
out there.
room. Yeah,
Digital and
thank you
now
so
of
much.
course
Yeah.
paperback. So uh, and one of the beautiful things I found about this as well, Daniel, is that kind of alluded to earlier in our chat, is that there was so much nuance in here. So I found that, or I guess the reason that I found things so engaging and so enticing as I'm reading this is it's beautifully written, sure, but there's also so many subtle nuances, and there's so much more to, I guess, the language of the story than the actual words that were on the page. And there's a lot of nuances to the point where later on in the story I would read something and a character would do a certain thing. Oh, well, that makes so much more sense why they acted this way or why they said what they said, which seemed completely natural at the time, but then later on, oh well, that makes so much more sense. It's got so much more weight to it now that I understand where they are now and what they're doing now. Was that something that you found came instinctual, or was that through rereading your own manuscript, or was it kind of, maybe drawing up some signposts before you sat down to actually flesh everything out and for the first draft?
Probably a little bit of both. I'm glad you mentioned that because the story on its surface seems to be, you can take the story on a surface level. What I mean by that is I love stories and I love films, I love reading them and writing them that appear to be a certain trope or appear to be a certain thing, but as you progress or you peel it back just a little bit, you see that there are layers, or it's something else or something additional. A great example of that is perhaps like the film It Follows, or the film The Neon Demon. It Follows, has some similarities to this, in that, yeah,
Yeah.
the Serpent Shadow and It Follows. It's about kids in one way. It's about kids just wanting to be kids, having fun, doing things, maybe not heeding the danger so much. And as you peel that back a little bit, oh wait a minute, this isn't really just about kids and a killer, although in the Serpent Shadow there are kids and they're trying to have fun and there is a killer on the loose. But it doesn't go down the pipe as your ordinary teen slasher, which is perfectly fine. But at first you might be like, "Oh, I've seen this before. It's kids and they're out in
Yeah.
nature and there's a killer. We know where this is going." So
Yeah.
that part was instinctual, and although I knew where I wanted it to go, so then that's probably why people you're referring to were behaving certain ways.
Hmm.
And then once the reader catches up to it, you're like, "Oh, okay. I knew that felt off, and I knew that wasn't right." But now I'm starting to see when the reveals start piling up.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, and you nailed it because we've all, of course, heard of the unreliable narrator, which I'm a big fan of, but I found personally reading through this, I became the unreliable reader because where I thought things were going to go or what was going to happen, it was my assumptions were not reliable, which
Yeah,
made a
and
lot of fun.
I guess it's a theme of going on in that this is this in many ways this is the story of the setting. It's the story of Cancun. Was it going to go? Was it going to progress? Was it going to go back to what it was? And like you opened up the interview by saying that's embodied in the arc of the main character David, who it's his coming of age, and he doesn't know himself, and he doesn't know so many things. So we as the reader get to explore that and maybe explore the teetering top or the teetering side. So yeah, so maybe it falls the way you think it falls. Maybe it doesn't, or hopefully, I think this is the kind of story where wow, I didn't even really know that direction was coming, and if I did my job right.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about that too, and absolutely it was a great coming of age story because it really David, the main character, is 17, I believe, in the story. He had such an innocence about him. All throughout the story, his innocence was both, a gift, I guess, an empowerment, but at the same time, it was also certainly a weakness as well. So it really, a lot of the situations that he experienced that he went through and his the evolution from those experiences, it really played off of that innocence on both sides of the fence, which I liked quite a bit. And the other thing I was going to ask you too, of course, is going back to some of the, certainly the Mayan and the Mexican history, is how much of the history that was embedded in the book was, purely your amazing imagination versus maybe some historical accuracy that you dropped into the story. I was thinking, of course, as they're exploring some of the pyramids where there was these fantastic human sacrifices that were happening as a way to try to, summon certain powers and things of that nature.
So I think the part that I at least would hope would be accurate, and at least I think is accurate in terms of my experience, would be the real world political aspects to it. Would be the fact of the conflict between the indigenous Mayans and between the Mexican nationals for identity, self-identity, governance, and politics of the reason. In terms of the magic, was where I took more liberties with that. There are aspects that were real in terms of things called like a codex or codices, which are these ancient writings. That's a fascinating piece of history that's real, that unfortunately, the time of the conquistadors, when the Europeans and the Spanish came, they destroyed so much of the wealth, and I'm not just meaning gold, so much of the writing, the papyrus, the knowledge, the progress was on these things called codices, and they were destroyed. There may be only 4 or 5 of them left in existence, why we only know about them. So those aspects are true. In terms of the feathered serpent aspect and the resemblance to Quetzalcoatl, which is Aztec, not Mayan, and in terms of the blood sacrifice, that's where the liberties were taken, and I've become less. I don't think anyone is sure of that, but that is perhaps the more tropey part of when you go into these kind of jungle or ancient culture things. And quite frankly, it's the part that, while it played its role in there, it's the part I'm least interested in, and also wanting to be just wanting to give the portrayal of that with awareness and respect of the liberties that may or may not have been taken.
Cool. Well, you portrayed it so well that when I was reading this, it felt like I was kind of in these pyramids with you, and like experiencing these things and watching all these sacrifices being attempted and whatnot. So, that was very cool. That was, could almost picture you as like you must have horseback ridden yourself through this particular area with all these pyramids and that, and the ruins of the Mayan ruins, because of how well it was done. It's like I was there.
Yeah, that's what I love. That's what I love about fiction, at least as a youngster when I first started reading. Yeah, I like to have that sense of being somewhere else, or being somewhere I'd never been yet, or being somewhere I'd never be. And I hope the Serpent Shadow delivers that kind of a reading experience to readers, and it's great to hear that you experienced that, Rick. Thank you.
definitely, yeah. And I could tell you definitely wrote this one from your heart, and you clearly are very much have a you know this passion for this amazing area, and then of course imagine the most horrible things that could happen in this area, and imagine what could possibly rip it all apart. So yeah, you nailed
Yeah,
that
I mean,
extremely well.
there's at least this is not 1986 anymore, and we don't want
No,
to say which we don't want to say who wins or which side wins, and maybe that's clear, maybe that isn't from the book, but
yeah,
the Mayan, the place that I was talking about in the book right now, it's just not there. These some of these places are just not there. They're beautiful structures of mankind now. It's an amazing party zone or a tropical paradise, but a lot of these things are just not there.
that's which is really sad. I mean, it's you think about that, you want to go down there and experience some of the history, but it's just like any other, like you said, party resort, spring break, locale that you can
Yep.
just go for a little while and drink
The,
your face off and have fun. And
the flip side of that is I was back there 10 years ago, and one of the worst experiences, or worst is a loaded term, one of a very memorable experience was seeing a town and seeing poverty that my privileged self had never experienced in America. And
yeah,
going back there, and this was about a decade ago, this place had changed and changed for the better. And it was the positive side of development, in that even though like these $1 million hotels and things, they may or may not be going into the pockets of locals, may or may not. At the very least, there was one place that I went to and was bracing myself for that was had changed, and people were living with dignity and respect, and were living. And that's just another side. That's just another side to a very difficult equation that, quite frankly, we all may have our opinions of, but
yeah.
I just don't have answers, or I don't even want to. I don't even want to say what's right or wrong.
And if you did say what's right or wrong, you'd probably be right on both sides of that. And I liked
Good point.
probably one of my favorite
Good point.
characters outside of David was certainly Tomasito, the cab driver in the story too, was awesome, and he really through him explores that aspect of it where
Yeah.
he's like, well, I guess it's the way it is. It's not ideal, but you know what? It gives us a living, and it maybe puts me in a position where I could help my kids out, so they're doing
Yeah.
something a little bit different with their lives when they're older.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned you are a father, and Tomasito
Yep,
is a father, and he embodies a lot of different aspects, and the primary aspect of he knows how hard he worked, and the main motivation for this character Tomasito is he wants to do what any father would want to do, which is give a better life and a life of dignity and respect for his son, and that is what drives him. And it seems intuitive, right? It seems like of course the father would want to do that, but yeah, then
sure.
when you enter the supernatural and you enter these forces in play, yeah, that's when where hopefully it gets a bit dicey.
It got very dicey for everybody.
Well,
Uh,
diciness makes good reading, easy
it does.
easy answers make short books and not really engaging books, perhaps.
Absolutely, couldn't have said it better myself. So speaking of working hard, as much as I, want to say, so this is great, talk this book up. It's so amazing. By the way, what are you doing now? I have to ask you, what is it? I know you mentioned you've got a few different things sort of in various stages of development. Is there anything in particular? Or are you just sort of going at your own pace and seeing where certain projects lead you to, or do you have any in mind where you maybe have goals of seeing these come out to the light of day?
Yeah, the book that the the next book that will probably come out is called Servant of the Eighth Wind, and that is a novel, a full length novel, and
Okay.
it's been acquired. It's been acquired by Lev Press. They're the same
Okay.
company that put out my third short story collection, Underworld Dreams. And yeah, it is set. It's a very different kind of tale, but it is set in the same. It is set in the same point place
Yeah.
in the world. So I'm really excited. I'm,
Oh,
I'm
cool.
just working on getting my final revisions from my editor into him, and then hopefully not before too long, we'll have a precise release date for that. But also, yes, I am. I'm always working on short stories, and I have some short stories that will be coming out in anthologies, and yeah, some other projects that I am going my own pace with that myself haven't found publishers for, and some that have found publishers that aren't quite ready to be announced yet. But when they are, I know who the first person to tell is now. And,
Awesome.
he
Well, no, I appreciate that.
may or may not be wearing a werewolf shirt, but let's just
Hey, I wore the right shirt today. I knew I put the shirt on for a reason. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be pretty exciting. So I fast became huge fan of yours, Daniel. And this whole year has been amazing for me. I've been reading. I haven't read a dud, and I don't remember when, but it's been such an amazing trip and reading.
It's a great time. Yeah,
there's so much.
It really is such a range. There's such a wonderful range of new authors, old authors, and just such a wonderful range of kinds, varieties, and styles of horror out. That what an exciting time it is for all of us to be readers and lovers of the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many different voices in that are coming out that maybe wouldn't have shone as brightly, I don't know, like 10 years or so ago. So this is fantastic, and it's and I love the fact too that you mentioned you refer to yourself as sort of a writer of quiet horror, because I think that's something that's so nice, and it's perfect too, I find, because it's a great palate cleanser in a sense too, where you can read something that's super extreme, like I need a bit of a break from that.
I think the Serpent Shadow, you might call it a slow burn, but it does, when it burns, I think it differs. Earlier you asked how it differed from my short fiction, and it just dawns on me, like I said, where there are some places where, since I knew this was going to be a horror book, where in other places in my work, in my short fiction, I may have cut away or stopped the camera before the violence or the blood, but in the Serpent Shadow, there are a couple places where the cameras roll, and at least for me, that's a departure, and at least for me, it might be the most rendered depictions of violence or blood that I've done. Yeah, if you're an extreme horror person, this might be, you just might be desensitized to it, but maybe for readers of my work, this might be like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't expect this from Daniel. So, which is an interesting and perhaps fun place to be with the story.
Yeah, that must have been pretty exciting for you as well, because was there any hesitation for you, or were you just head first into this? Because there are certainly near towards the end of it, I'm not going to give any spoilers out, but there's certainly one particular scene that obviously because you wrote it, that there's some serious bloodletting going on, and it was, especially compared to the slow burn, as you mentioned, up to that point, it really became so much more shocking than if there was that sort of level of of violence throughout the story, which there isn't. But then all of a sudden, bam, it's like it's on, and it's on with a vengeance.
It felt true and organic to the story and to the characters, and while I knew that was coming, I just was telling myself, using the words of the great Jack Ketchum, who tells all of his students, and he's sort of known for saying it, don't look away. I knew at least in that scene wasn't going to be looking away, and that was going to be rendered. And just knowing that this was going to be a horror book, that it was going to be okay to deliver those depictions.
Very much so, yeah. And it wouldn't have been the same without them. So I'm really glad that you got that in there as well. So what can we expect? So regarding the Shadows of the, I'm going to screw up the title again. Sorry, the next one you're working on right now, the finalized.
Oh, Servant of the Eighth Wind. Yeah, the novel.
That's the one.
Press.
I got the number wrong.
I don't like they that had release dates, but I'm my publisher has just been incredibly patient with me getting the final round of notes and revisions back. So the Lev is waiting on me, but I plan on getting that to them, and then once they've got that final manuscript, it shouldn't be long before they'll announce when it comes out, and I will definitely be giving you a heads up in advance of that, Rick. So
I look forward to that.
See what you think of that.
Now, with the foray into some of the larger works, of course, with the novella, and then of course after that with the the full-on novel, do you think that's something you're going to be focusing more on, or do you still plan on, you know, putting some emphasis or putting some focus rather still on the short stories that brought you into the game in the first place?
Oh, I'll never give up the short fiction. I'm constantly writing fiction. I call it cheating when I'm having a work day and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get this far in getting the novel done. I
Yeah.
instead of cheating, instead of like going to a movie or like going and playing hooky, I'm like, oh, I'm cheating. I'm going to write a short story today. So I have a ton of short stories in progress. I'm fortunate enough to have been invited to some projects, and I just have some short stories that I'm just writing of my own volition. So I
Right.
love short stories. You couldn't pay me enough to not write short stories. So yeah, I have a lot of short stories, and hopefully a lot of short story news to be on the way. Thank you for asking.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. No, I look forward to that too. And of course, as somebody that follows you on social media, particularly in Facebook, I see your posts, and you've got such an awesome perspective on how to look at various situations in life. I can't even imagine you not writing short stories, because I'm sure you've got all these
Oh,
ideas that can only be, kind of exercised by writing those short stories and getting those perspectives out of your system.
oh, that's really kind of you. Thank you so much, Rick.
Very welcome. I did want to ask you if you can leave the audience with one big message or takeaway from things that they can expect, overall from your writing, and in particular from the Serpent Shadow. What do you want them to take away from them?
I'd love for readers to come away from the Serpent Shadow with a sense of wonder, with a sense of danger, and with a sense of place and a sense of uncertainty as to what may or may not have happened, and that what they think and how they perceived it is interacting with the story.
Beautiful. And of course, for everybody watching this, I'm going to put links down below as well, how to get this book and his other book over here on my shoulder, The Night Marchers, which is an incredible book. And I'll post a link down here too, American Cannibals, that Rebecca Rowland edited. You've got an amazing story in there as well, so I'll make sure that that gets out there. And then, yeah, for everybody watching this, if you can kindly hit like on there, make sure this gets out to as many people as possible, because well, it's a gift to get more people involved in Dan's writing as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you very much for coming on the show again, Dan. Really appreciate that, man.